all profit is value extraction. And that means that all profit is theft from you.
Corporate America is on welfare, and we've got to get them off welfare.
The last words on my lips, I am a revolutionary, and you're gonna have to keep on saying that.
All right, so we're in part 3 now. So I have a couple things to share with you guys real quick here before we start back on it. One, I took this out of my MR2. This is the electrical junction box, which I thought was the problem, and it looks like it's just fine, except where I broke the plastic clip there. So I'm not really sure what the problem is with that. The other thing I discovered last night is that Chapo Trap House exists in the same fictional universe as Breaking Bad and Welcome to Night Vale. If you go by Don Markstein's shared universe criteria, they all link together via the podcast Comedy Bang Bang. So Bob Odenkirk played Saul Goodman on the Comedy Bang Bang podcast. And then Comedy Bang Bang did a crossover episode with The Thrilling Adventure Hour, which did a crossover episode with Welcome to Night Vale. And then James Adomian played Jesse Ventura on Comedy Bang Bang and Chapo Trap House. So they're all in the same universe. I'm sure your minds are all blown, but
that is quite a web.
Yeah.
I'm also in the same universe as them.
No, it's fictional. It's not real.
Yeah, I'm fictional.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. Well, in that case,
I thought I led with that with you guys. Oh, I'm sorry.
I think this means that you and the rest of us live in Scott Aukerman's head, or maybe his dreams or something. You know.
I doubt it, but maybe.
That's what I came up with last night when I couldn't fall asleep. So making connections with the
you were that high, you still couldn't sleep.
Yes. Yeah. Get out the red yarn and the thumbtacks and.
How does Pepe Sylvia tie into all of this?
Yeah. All right, so that's all I have. Sorry to waste your time with that bullshit, but so Brandon, where were we on this?
I was just finishing up all of the organizations and everything that kind of spawned off from the League of Revolutionary Black Workers book club that they started. So I was at the tail end of that. After the League of Revolutionary Black Workers eventually does split up, the book group the reading group stayed around. They renamed it from the ground up, and they opened their own bookstore. It was the From the Ground Up bookstore. And just because I didn't really get into it earlier, it seems like everyone in this era started their own bookstore. It was like the thing you did. From the Ground Up, which was the reading group that the League of Revolutionary Black Workers started, had their own bookstore. Black Star Productions, that spawned off from the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, had their own bookstore. The Motor City Labor League had their own bookstore. And in numerous instances, these were in the same neighborhoods as other leftist bookstores.
So were these actually just fronts? Were they selling drugs or something? Which I think would be cool. I'm not condemning that at all. But you're right. You're oh, well, that was just what they did is everyone opened their own bookstore. I'm like, are there any mafia bookstores or what's the deal here?
No, as best as I can tell is people were a lot more into following their particular ideology very closely. So, there would be a Trotskyist bookstore, a Leninist bookstore, anarchist bookstore, so on and so forth.
It's actually kind of funny.
But it actually seems like these don't seem like fronts. The Black Star bookstore was a front only in so much as they had an entire printing operation going. No, leftist bookstores were actually like a much, much bigger deal in the earlier part of the 1900s. I actually have an entire book where they get into a lot of that and how there was like crackdowns on leftist literature in, I think, the 30s or 40s. Yeah, I mean, if that's something you're genuinely interested in, Books on Trial, Red Scare in the Heartland is a good book.
Okay.
Well, I say it's good. The first quarter is good, but I bounce around between books a lot.
So basically, the bookstore was just the podcast of their day. Everyone was just starting their own.
Yes,
their own
that's
niche,
there you go.
thing.
That sounds like it exactly.
Yeah, I don't think I could really put it a lot better. But I mean, like, it was also, they were organizing spots too. You know, like, all of the anarchists would meet up at the anarchist bookstore. I think it was the Black Star bookstore that they said, you know, people would just come hang out. This was, I think, one of the great successes, or rather, it shows some of the great successes of Drum. People would get fired and come to the bookstore to discuss issues, discuss what happened, how they can work with the union to get their job back, or talk to somebody and find out who else might be hiring. There were accounts of people would just go there to bullshit and hang out, or like they're having trouble at home and like get one of their comrades' opinions on whatever's going on. It was a very social place. Like, you know, maybe in a bind, that was where you slept for the night. Like that sort of shit. It was very much a community organizing spot in a lot of instances.
That is very cool.
And they actually sold books though to pay the bills, or was it like more?
I think it was like an
community-funded?
afterthought.
Okay.
No, I mean, every city I've lived in for years always has one or two leftist bookstores. But yeah, I think that there were instances where there were at least 2 or 3 bookstores on like the same little like stretch of road. I'm sure they were just like staring at the window like fucking Trotskyists. Get out of the neighborhood, Trots! All right, so yeah, I just want to get into that because I kind of wish that there was still a fucking scene like that where there could just be like 4 or 5 leftist bookstores in any fucking city.
Yeah.
Now we struggle to support 4 or 5 bookstores at all.
I watched some of that movie that you were telling me about. The I already forgot what it was called.
It's a hard name to remember. It finally got the news.
Finally got the news. Yeah. It's really good so far. I haven't finished watching it, but like, you know, there's scenes of them, you know, putting together their like flyers and pamphlets and newspapers and stuff, where they're just like using typewriters and then like cutting out the columns and gluing them on a page and mimeographing the whole thing. So I mean, it's a pretty primitive, I don't know what you'd call it, newspaper technology by today's standards, but it was kind of cool. They're just, you know, making all these flyers to hand out to all the people at the entrance to the factory or whatever.
I read somewhere that the Black Star Productions printing operation they had actually had computerized presses in 1970.
Wow. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Well, I mean, you know, pretty rudimentary computers, I'm sure, but they supposedly just pushed until they break. Like they had because now I'm drawing a blank on the newspaper that they formed.
The one with the college paper?
Well, that was the Wayne State paper that they took over. That is a different one. That was South End. I'm trying to remember the name of... That's stupid that I can't remember that right now. I'm sure it'll come back to me in a second. But they had a lot of problems getting kicked out of other printing presses because people would find out that a certain printing operation was like printing for them, and because they were openly like communist, leftist, or whatever, or organizing strikes or agitating, they would often only get through a few runs with a particular printer, and then have to find somebody else. At one point, they were having to have things printed out of town and shipped in. So once they got a little bit more resources, they started printing everything themselves and printing stuff for other people. I don't know to what all extent that was happening in terms of printing for other people. But from what I read, they would run the presses till they broke, fix it, and run it till it broke again. Like they were pretty hardcore about it. So yeah, and that's why it became such a hangout spot, because they were running the presses like all night long, so that everything could go out in the morning. So there was just always people at the store.
Okay, that does sound like a pretty cool hangout spot. If I'm honest, like I would hang out
Inner
there.
City Voice, that was the fucking
Okay.
the newspaper that sort of I think it predated Drum, but was one of the central sort of things that was used to organize people before. All right, so I'm gonna get into like the real like decline of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers specifically, and ultimately a lot of what it comes down to is I discussed James Foreman a little bit. He was the person that had connections through SNCC. He had been a Black Panther Party member. He had done some organizing in Selma, and butted heads a little bit with some of the more religious organizers down there. Now, my impression of James Foreman was that he might have been a little bit full of himself. I couldn't find enough about him to really like condemn him for this, but there were accounts where either someone else or maybe he himself actually like labeled his own school of thought based on his writings as like Fanon Formanism. Kind of ripping off like Marxist Leninism or Maoism or whatever. Like it was Franz Fanon and James Foreman. Like, and I'm like,
Yeah,
I don't know, man.
I mean, that's kind of cringy. It's a very human.
Well, he might have been an excellent writer with some good theories. So I don't know. I haven't read anything he wrote.
I mean, that could still. So he could.
Seems like he was maybe getting a little bit ahead of himself, though.
He could have been fantastic. He could have had really good theories, but if you're naming it yourself after yourself like that, it's a little full of yourself. You got to let other people do that.
Yeah, that's what it seemed like. But maybe it was somebody else calling it that. I second guess myself a lot. I do think that he referred to it as that. But he was one of the people who was really central to founding what they called the Black Workers Congress. And that was, they had discussed the possibility of taking the League of Revolutionary Black Workers and sort of franchising it so that they could spread nationally. Because, the League was really just to organize the local RUMs in Detroit, and they wanted to keep it that way at the end of the day. So their options were start a larger umbrella organization or create individual leagues in other cities to help organize in those cities. They opted. I think Ken Cockrell actually advised them against doing the sort of franchised one because I forget what it was, but there was some sort of legal issue where Cockrell advised them that they would be better off working under a blanket organization than being so directly connected. Because, I mean, worth noting, I don't think I brought this up. The League was like a properly incorporated and legal entity. This wasn't just like what they called themselves or the name that they organized under. They were, I believe, incorporated.
That's cool.
So, there was legal work done.
So they were trying to franchise into other cities across the U.S. Were there already revolutionary union movements there, or was this pretty much just a Detroit thing that they were trying to get started in other cities? Or were there organizations already existing that they could have reached out to potentially?
Okay, there were RUMs in, from what I've read, at least 2 other cities. I don't think any of them ever had the momentum that Detroit did. I know Atlanta was one of them. That one stuck out to me because I grew up around there. But it was not a big thing. But they were trying to spread it, their idea of organizing the masses, like we discussed them being like almost syndicalist in nature. That was what they were trying to do. They were trying to organize revolution in the workplace and on a national scale.
Yeah,
And
which is what which kind of interests me, just because I would want to know more what Ken Cockrell's thinking was here. But if you're trying to avoid certain legal troubles, that's almost kind of the classic anarchist approach, is to kind of decentralize, where you're like, oh, there's another league of revolutionary black workers for this city and that city, but like they're connected, but also kind of not, so that they're not. It's not like if there's one misstep, the whole thing comes down, which is what can happen with an umbrella organization. You have somewhat more
well,
control,
I
but
think he
like
was specifically thinking of it in terms of like RICO cases and stuff. Like if you're all operating under the banner.
to me that's almost more. Well, that's if you have like one central organization doing that, wouldn't you be more at risk than like a loose band of groups doing similar work locally? Wouldn't you be in greater danger by having that centralized leadership?
Gonna be honest here, I don't know.
Yeah, I
All
guess.
I have to go on was I think there was like one or two sentences dedicated to Ken Cockrell's
Yeah.
specific reasoning why he didn't want to franchise out the like leagues.
Hmm.
But Foreman had his own idea anyway, so they went with the Black Workers Congress, which was going to be the when I say umbrella organization, like it was they were just trying to get people from across the country, and they would hold meetings, and you would send delegates, and you could organize amongst each other without necessarily being formally connected. Yeah, so James Foreman, I believe the Black Workers Congress was sort of his brainchild, and it seemed like the first get together for the Black Workers Congress was pretty good. They had 400 delegates. It was a third of the delegates that were sent were women, and this, unlike the League and the Rums, uh, they weren't really welcoming of white people still, but they opened up to other races, which was especially relevant in Detroit because I got into it a little bit, but there was an enormous like population of people from the Middle East that had come in to Detroit, and were treated the same as black people. So they wanted it to really be an organ, like the Black Workers Congress, in spite of its name, was for all people of color.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, in that film, I mean, they're also printing stuff in Arabic for like some flyers or something. I don't know what it says, of course, but
Yeah, I don't know a ton about like the stuff that they would hand out at the job site, but they were like reaching out to, I think, pretty much everyone that wasn't white, which kind of makes sense. And because there had been like different tendencies amongst league members in terms of in-plant organizing versus expanding outward, once the they founded the Black Workers Congress, that was sort of the final straw. There were still a lot of people on shop floors saying, it's still dangerous to work here. What the fuck are you doing trying to start a national organization? You have on the ground work that you need to be doing. The Rums were losing steam. They were getting a lot of people were getting fired. When they had wildcats, a lot of people would lose their jobs over it. Two of the lead organizers for the Rums, I think they were both like the Dodge or Eldon Avenue plant workers. They got fired for fucking beating up their supervisors. Which,
I mean, that's
there
funny.
were so many accounts of violence on the shop floor in some of these plants. It's wild. It is. I can't even imagine living like that. Like one of the things that they expressed was basically just don't ever hit your boss, because there's a lot of things that you can come back from, but it's in the union rules that if you physically attack one of your coworkers or bosses, you get fired. So well, I'm sorry. I think if you were the first one to throw a punch, so they would encourage people to not throw the first punch.
Does that extend off the job site? You know, if I punch my boss at a neutral location, am I good? That's really what I would like to know.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, good to know.
I mean, I'm sure the boss is going to be out to get you after that.
Hey, not if you punch him hard enough.
There was actually a funny story. There's a story from after sort of the decline of the league and decline of the Rums, where so like by 1970, a lot of the Rums had deteriorated heavily, and El Rum, which at one point was the largest shop for the Rums, was pretty much gone. There was a few members left, and it's hard to say exactly how many there were because they became very secretive. They stopped organizing anything openly, and it became like very isolated. I'm not exactly sure when this happens in relation to the Black Workers Congress, but I think it was actually after, so I should hold off. But yeah, actually, let's get to what happened with the Black Workers Congress first. Uh, because of the big falling out between like different members of the League and Black Workers Congress and the Rums, there was an official split. The Black Workers Congress was a separate entity than the League, and there was only one organization that the Black Workers Congress did not invite to join them, and that was the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. So that's how bad the split was, is they no longer wanted to work together formally.
Now, what other kinds of organizations did they invite? Other like revolutionary unions, or were there other larger organizations they were working with, like the Black Panther Party or something?
They didn't work heavily with the Black Panther Party. They were sort of on odds. I really don't know what other organizations were involved in the Black Workers Congress. There's not a lot of information about it because it failed so quickly. But it was their attempt at having a national movement, like an organized national movement.
Sure, and it didn't work out.
Yeah. So, like I said, the Black Workers Congress was rad. For a third of the members that attended the first delegation were women, and that also ended up being sort of like one of the big problems that people had. Not necessarily with the amount of women that attended, but everybody pretty universally agreed that the leadership of the Black Workers Congress did not reflect the attitudes of a lot of women. The women in the Black Workers Congress, because they were all women of color, they were like openly hostile towards a lot of like contemporary women's lib sort of organizations, because they viewed it as white women's liberation, not like real women's liberation, and that was alienating for some people. And then the ever problematic Black Workers Congress was being very forward about trying to include women. Actually, a lot of their demands were centered around they were demanding employer provided daycare, equal pay for women, a handful of other things. There was even one talk of somebody was trying to demand pay for housewives or mothers who had to stay at home. So there was a lot of consideration put into women's rights. But then there was also just a lot of allegations of domestic violence amongst the ranks of people in attendance of the Black Workers Congress. So, that tends to not be a thing that draws people in.
I feel like that's consistent. I feel like that's an issue with almost every leftist organization, just in general, or any kind of organizing attempts. There's this difference between ideology and individual people, and it's just I'm always shocked by it, because you're like, how are you good on this issue, and then like, but in your personal life you're just like, oh well, I'm going to do the opposite of that. I've never understood. I've also never been in a position where it's like someone is going to judge me in that respect, where it's like, hey, you espouse this, but then you're abusive towards your significant other. I mean, I don't think I am, so I don't really get too many accusations of such. But I'm also not at that, like, in a major organization where that would come up. But
I think it goes back to a lot of like the expression that you have to kill the cop in your head.
Yeah,
if you
I
expand
suppose
that
that's
outward, like you can have an ideology and still not realize the ways that your own behavior not only like further that ideology, but openly conflict with it.
Yeah, that makes
yeah. I
sense.
think that's really well said. I mean,
But also, okay, this is a little bit like a, I don't want to say conspiracy theory, but I don't know. I'll just throw it out there. There was still lead and gasoline in this era. And it's like a
that's
documented
true.
environmental phenomenon that after they removed lead from gasoline, violence went on a steady decline, and people who were born after they stopped putting lead in gasoline were like markedly less violent and had better impulse control. And I'm only bringing that up because there were so many stories about people just fighting on the factory floor and attacking their boss and stuff like that. And I'm just like, surely the world wasn't so insanely different that like people are just throwing down with everyone they fucking see on a daily basis compared to now where like, you know, if there was a fight at my work, that would be a big fucking deal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
for them
true.
it was frequent enough that they kind of had to make specific rules about it. Now, granted, you know, my shop's got like 40 people, and these shops had thousands, but you know,
I mean, that's not nothing. There is a connection
I'm
there.
just putting it out there that maybe there was an exterior reason why people had poor impulse control in this point in time.
Yeah, and just also like that, like from what I saw of the film, it seemed like a very stressful and monotonous and dangerous job, especially the areas where the black workers were.
Yeah,
So I
for
can,
sure.
I mean, that's not an excuse, but I can see how being in that situation would drive someone towards it wouldn't bring out the best in people, I could say. But yeah, like I said, that's no
Yeah, it's
excuse.
always disappointing, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you're underpaid, overworked, and stressed out, and you know huffing lead fumes from gas all day long, it's not a recipe for success.
Right.
Yeah, like so other criticisms that people had were of like the bigger players in this story, like Ken Cockrell, John Watson, Mike Hamlin. Everybody had pretty specific complaints about them. For all of the good that he did, a lot of people felt like Ken Cockrell was just being overbearing, and in a lot of cases accused him of reformism, which I will get into. I don't wholly disagree with some of those accusations, but he was doing good work. You know, I'll give him credit for what he was doing. John Watson kind of became absent from the league by and large. He was very much into traveling around the world and doing film stuff, trying to get production. He was accused or criticized for he started trying to make a movie about Rosa Luxemburg. That was something that he was trying to get funding for. And a lot of people were like, yeah, that would be a really good movie. We like your idea. But why the fuck are you doing this? It has nothing to do with anything that is going on in y'all's situation right now. And I don't want to accuse him of just being a creative type who was pursuing like artistic endeavors, but it became at least somewhat detrimental to the league overall because he wasn't really contributing to organizing. So he viewed what he was doing as contributing by spreading the word, and other people were like, no, we need you to contribute by actually helping us improve the shop.
Yeah, so at that time was he still kind of in a leadership position? Because like,
He was on the executive board of the league.
yeah, that's not. Yeah, okay. I mean, again, there's nothing wrong with leaving organizing to like pursue other things, but like don't still be in leadership. Then I guess
No, I
is
mean he was the one who founded Black Star Productions, and that was an arm of the league.
yeah. I mean, I'm see that to me is like if you pursue that project and you kind of take it in a different direction, that's fine. But like don't leave your other responsibilities behind. Like you should give that like, hey, I'm going to be absent from this side of the organizing. Someone else should step in here. Would be the way to handle that, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean it's a valid criticism, but his side of the argument is also valid. Like, he
Yeah, no,
wanted to
exactly.
spread the word. They wanted to focus strictly on what was going on in shop. And that was roughly their criticism of Mike Hamlin too. He was kind of became very well connected through all of this and started traveling around the country a lot and became very focused on national issues more than the local ones that the league was actually there to deal with. And so effectively all of the big founding members of the league, they kind of just got accused of preferring the company of the bourgeois over their actual workers.
So they were kind of glad handing with film buffs or Hollywood types. Is that what the accusation was? Or
Ken Cocker was getting involved in local
okay,
politics. John Watson was traveling around doing film stuff. He had been to Europe a couple of times at this point. I don't remember specific stuff, but Mike Hamlin was focusing on national issues. He was big in helping form the Black Workers Congress, and yeah, they were all trying to do these kind of big pie in the sky ideas and just neglecting the stuff that was going on at home while they were still effectively the leadership of that.
Yeah, it's a recipe for disaster. I get their side of it. Like, yeah, I'd want to be more national too. I always want to spread the word. You know, it feels good to go big, but yeah, if you're still at the leadership on this local project, you need to either cede that power to someone who's present, or you need to focus on that. So, I, I,
And some organizations made it work. There were several Black Panther Party members who would fly around the country and go to international branches to make sure that things were running smoothly at each individual branch. There's stories. I know Donald Cox showed up in one city at some point, realized that there were drug problems rampant amongst the ranks of the Black Panthers in that city. That it was poorly organized. It really had just was in shambles, and so he really relocated there for I think a couple of months and kind of whipped that branch back into shape. So there is a role for that sort of like jet setting lifestyle. Like, he traveled all over the world doing work for the Black Panther Party, but they had a huge base of operations where they could afford to have a few individual members who were traveling the world. The league was a lot smaller than that. They didn't have really the spare manpower.
yeah,
And I think everybody realized that John Watson was just being a little bit too much of a dreamer when he is trying to make a movie about Rosa Luxemburg, who doesn't jive with them ideologically necessarily, because she was not a Leninist, she was not black, she was not American, she was not even in the same like era that they were in. So people were like, "You are not really focused on what is going on at hand right now."
yeah. I mean, it sounds like they got a little overextended. Basically, they focused their horizon a little too far out than they were able to back up with the resources they had.
I think that if I had to put myself in their shoes, I think maybe they just didn't realize how much work was going to be involved in not even just growing the ranks of the Rums, but maintaining them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to recruit new members, but they were constantly struggling with having members fired, because there was a lot of criticisms of like Wildcats that they took of them being poorly planned and just resulting in too many people being fired for them.
yeah, that is a big criticism. You know, yeah, it's when we're talking about it, whatever it is, 50 years later, and we're like, oh, well, a bunch of people got fired for these wildcat strikes. That fucking blows. That is your livelihood. Like, if you're the one who gets fired for it, you're fucked. I mean, you are in a bad place, and that's multiple people. You really have to avoid that. Because like, it's easy to forget that, like, that is hugely life altering for the people who experienced it. You know, yeah, from the leadership perspective, you're like, oh well,
I think
it's like that old God, that quote that is attributed to Stalin. I don't know if he actually said it, but one death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic. It's kind of the same here. You know, X number of firings is just doing business of organizing, but like every single one of those is really really bad for the people experiencing it. Is kind of
Oh yeah, but I also get where they were coming from. Like, I think they generally viewed the UAW as overly bureaucratic and not consequently not really representing them.
sure.
So then they wanted to be the organization that, when something went wrong on a Monday, they could respond on a Tuesday. And in theory, that's great. They just got ahead of themselves. They were behaving that way, but they didn't have the resources.
Yeah. Which that kind.
So,
Well, I'll let you finish up, but
oh, go ahead.
kind of bringing back into like the UAW, and the idea that there are still these other unions involved who aren't as revolutionary, and they're maybe a little too close to management and whatnot. What was the relationship or the response from like the UAW? How did they react to?
They did not like them.
I figured. So how was that interaction, and like were they almost trying to union bust the more revolutionary union at all? Was that a phenomenon that was happening?
Well, the Wildcats that the Rums were doing, they weren't 100% participation. Like, even the better ones had high participation, probably in the 70% range, but still only for a day or two.
Yeah.
There were a lot of people who, if they showed up to work and there was a picket line, they went home. Not because they supported what was being picketed, but because they supported other people in the union.
Sure.
But that only went so far. So I think if I think that the UAW really didn't have to do any union busting. They were too weak of a faction inside. Now the UAW was openly critical of them and was not especially quiet about it. They did some sort of backhanded stuff to try and prevent Rum supported like elected union officials from gaining office.
Yeah, they went in and like stole the ballot boxes or something like that, right?
Yeah, that was the one that I had attributed to the case of Jordan Sims, but it was someone else, and I can't remember the person's name. But yeah, they seized the ballot boxes and were like counting them out of sight of anybody who was trying to watch over it. Some of the tactics that the unions were doing looked like, I mean, I don't want to say Pinkerton tactics because they weren't like openly shooting people, but it seemed like hired hand kind of strong arm shit, but it was union folks.
Yeah, see, that's what I was wondering is, would we see these more moderate, comfortable unions seeing these revolutionary unions as a threat enough that they might do the same kinds of things that, management would do? Are they saying, hey, don't join those revolutionary union guys, they're going to get you into trouble. We're a family here. We're here to take care of those safety concerns. It takes us 4 weeks to, even do anything, and there's, a million miles of red tape, but we're a family, and you lose that when you get into the the rum or whatever. Were they kind of so it sounds like they were discouraging that kind of organizing, and they were trying to stop workers from engaging.
Leadership didn't like them. A lot of the rank and file union members mostly kind of seemed like annoyed with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, they just thought maybe they were making a mountain out of molehill, or just blowing things out of proportion. Because a lot of Rum members were young.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the older union guys of any race, black or white or anyone else, people who had been on the job longer, tended to be more skeptical of their tactics because they had been in the union for a while and, for better or worse, viewed it as, no, you just got to be patient and you'll get what you need eventually.
I feel like that is kind of a problem with a lot of unions today, is you get these older members who are just like, oh, you just, oh, it's not a big deal. And it's like, man, back when it was a big deal, people got fucking paid. Like,
I don't know, man. I look back at this era as like, because I think 1969 was the highest minimum wage ever when you account for inflation. But then I'm reading about these folks who are, doing 6 and 7 day weeks, 10 and 12 hour days, just to pay the bills. Working like buku overtime, and it sounded like a lot of them were still struggling. So, I've talked to my older coworkers about what things were like back then because, I kind of tend to romanticize the 70s for all of the revolutionary attitudes and also just awesome cars. And, I've had coworkers be like, it's not like what you were describing. We still struggled. It was fucking hard. We weren't making so much money that we were just living high on the hog. Like, it might have been easier for us then than it is for you now, but that doesn't mean it was easy for us then.
I wonder, were they getting time and a half also? Or when did that start?
They were getting time and a half, but it was mandatory overtime.
Okay.
In at least some instances, it's cited that you would be written up for not working overtime.
Yeah.
And at that point, like, basically you're telling me that you can work me to death, you'll just pay me slightly better. Fuck that.
Yeah, that's bullshit.
I used to work every fucking hour overtime that I was able to, and I am so over that shit. Nowadays, I just want to be paid for the work I fucking do, enough to live, and not any fucking more. Man, maybe if I've got to buy a new engine or I can maybe almost afford a blower, I'll fucking work an extra couple of hours one week, but that's for toys. Like, you shouldn't be having to work 50 and 60-hour weeks to survive. And I used to have to do that shit.
Yeah, that shit sucks. I mean, when I was really poor, I had the opposite problem. I couldn't get enough hours because they didn't want to put me to full time and pay me benefits and stuff like that. I think that's more the case these days, where they're like, "Oh, we're gonna give you 38 hours exactly every week."
I think of like it to me that looks like the divide between. I know a lot of people are iffy on this language, but like skilled and unskilled labor. If it's hard to find somebody, and like at my job, I'm a machinist and I do a lot of welding. It's hard to find someone else with that skill set. And then if you do, you're going to have to give them benefits because if you don't, somewhere else will. Like we're having a hard time hiring right now just because our benefits kind of suck and our pay is mediocre.
Yeah.
Yeah, same.
It's cheaper to work people overtime than it is to hire more people. When you like factor in insurance and like 401k or whatever, all that shit. So they would rather just work the people they have harder than get more people, which is a shitty fucking attitude. We're over here demanding 40 hours pay for 30 hours work, and they're like, what about 50 hours pay for 60 hours work? That's been a huge tangent. So basically, to leave off with the Black Workers Congress, it just failed. I summed it up and what some of its problems were, and its failures. It didn't really seem to have a lot of successes. They had a lot of good ideas, and the first meeting was well attended, but that was also the most well attended meeting they ever had. They never had any success growing the ranks in the Black Workers Congress. So I'm not sure when that formally dissolved. I think like 71-ish. But it was done pretty quickly. It never even really got off the ground. The League, on the other hand, actually kind of kept chugging along for a little bit in weird ways. So on Easter in 1971, they purged a bunch of members, and I couldn't find out a whole lot more about that. I just included that mostly because how much communists love to purge the ranks.
Yeah.
But they got rid of a bunch of members who had some conflicting ideology. I think maybe they got rid of some of the more hardcore like nationalist types.
So we're talking rank and file people they were kind of getting rid of.
They listed all of the names for people that were they got rid of in the Easter purges, and I didn't recognize them. But the executive board was a lot bigger than the 4 founding members, so I'm really not sure. the roles that the individuals who got stripped out of the ranks were playing.
Yeah.
Because by this point, all the information I can find is fairly chaotic. But in '71, the league came to a formal conclusion, but it got folded in and became the Detroit chapter of the Communist League. So it actually still existed, and I think it stayed as the Detroit chapter of the Communist League until 76 or 78 ish.
Now, if you don't mind, what is the Communist League? I'm not familiar with that organization. Were they like the Communist Party, or were they a rival to the Communist Party in the U.S., or were they, I don't know, a blanket organization?
I mean, they were basically a Marxist Leninist organization for people of color, as far as I
And
can
I'm
tell.
sorry. So this was an already existing organization, right? The Communist League.
Yeah, the League of Revolutionary Black Workers just kind of swapped over and became the Detroit branch. I don't
Okay.
know. I think there wasn't a branch of the Communist League. I don't know a ton about the Communist League. I didn't dive into it too hard. But I guess in the 50s, they split off from the Communist Party of the United States, CPUSA.
Okay.
And the Communist League was around until now I can't, like I said, late 70s, and that at that point it became another organization called the Communist Labor Party of North America, and that stayed around till 93. So in some shape, form, or fashion, they kind of stuck around for a couple of decades. I don't know how many of the original members stayed around, but there was a little bit of staying power there. They just kept changing names.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's kind of natural. I mean, that's just that happens. So they kept folding into other organizations and whatever. I mean, that's you save what's there, and they keep doing the organizing work on the ground. So
Yeah, I don't know how effective the work that they were doing was in that era because
yeah,
the 80s weren't really the bastion of leftist politics that
no.
we would all like. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there was a leftism going on in the 80s, but I don't personally know much about anything big going on during the Reagan years.
Yeah, mostly Reagan, and punk music that was anti-Reagan.
Yeah, but in the 80s, a lot of punk music was anti-communist too.
Yeah, it was.
Oh,
We're a conflicted bunch.
yeah. So the one last cool thing that I'll cover before I start wrapping this up is after the League became, or after the League of Revolutionary Black Workers became the Communist League, they had one good summer left in them. And in 1973, there was a series of wildcat strikes throughout the summer. The first one was on July 24th at the Jefferson Assembly Plant. Two dudes, Isaac Shorter and Larry Carter, who at this point, I don't know for a fact that they were in the Communist League, but they were affiliated with a lot of former League and Rum workers. They climbed into like the control cage for the assembly line and manually shut down the entire assembly line because there was a foreman at the shop that was widely regarded as openly racist. So they petitioned to have him removed, and they got something like 250, 260 out of 300 workers to sign the petition to have him removed.
Damn.
And the company was like, no, fuck you, we're leaving him. And so they shut down the assembly line. They stayed in the cage for, I think, 13 hours, preventing anybody from coming in and turning the assembly line back on.
That's fucking awesome.
Nice.
Yeah, they had crowds of people blocking the way so that even if they wanted to, police or guards or nobody were able to get into the cage. So, a good show of solidarity there.
That's awesome.
So 13-hour shutdown. What does that translate to in like number of vehicles not made for 13 hours of shutdown? How big of a dent did they put in that shop's production?
I'm not really sure because I'm not even sure what, off the top of my head, the Jefferson plant made. because a lot of these, even saying that they prevented one car from being made, that's, the more I think about it, the more iffy that is, because a lot of these plants would make axles or engines or body panels. So you could cause bottlenecks and stuff. I don't know to what extent. I think Jefferson was just an assembly plant, so they might have actually very genuinely been preventing cars from being put together. In terms of how many they prevented in a 13-hour period, I would guess, I don't know, maybe 100, couple hundred.
So not an insignificant amount. They were really slowing things down.
I don't know. It wasn't, a few. If I had to make a genuine guess, completely ballparking, several hundred cars.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
even without knowing even specific numbers, what I can tell you is just in any industrial setting, a shutdown like that is pretty catastrophic. These plants are incredibly expensive to run, especially labor intensive things where you have a lot of labor, a lot of machinery, a lot of lights, rent, all that stuff. The cost of production is very, very high. And kind of like we talked about with the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, that is especially relevant to the largest of corporations. So automakers are affected by that more so than a lot of other industries. So if you shut down for 13 hours, like that's a plant that is running 24 hours a day, right? So they've got three
Yep.
8-hour shifts. If you shut down for, you know, 13 hours, that is more than a shift and a half, a little bit more than a shift and a half. And that factory will run 24 hours and it might be profitable 20 of those hours. Ballparking. It could be less. It could be it may be not profitable for 20 of those hours and only profitable for 4. It may only be profitable for 2 hours of a day. Now the other thing is,
I can put this in some pretty tangible terms, just not in terms of cars.
well,
Are you guys familiar with Matco tools?
Yes.
yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah.
One of my coworkers used to work at a Matco manufacturing plant, and he told me that they were very upfront that the assembly line never fucking stops, because if something broke and they genuinely had to stop the assembly line for any reason, it cost the company several $100,000 an hour.
So it's safe to say with a 13-hour shutdown, they made their point to management.
It's
Yeah.
it's huge.
I mean, they got the guy fired. So
what a great ending.
yeah,
Love to see it.
honestly, I figure if it only took 13 hours, they didn't really give a shit about this dude. It was like, actually, we are willing to throw this dude under the fucking bus because you guys are costing us a fortune for this shithead.
I would argue actually a 13-hour shutdown was probably cost the company, 13 times that guy's salary. I would think. It is
No, so much more than that.
Exactly. You're not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at least, what it costs any company in an industrial setting to shut down, there's all sorts of costs associated with it. But here's the other thing to keep in mind, and this is something just to know for organizing in general. The way costs and revenue work to companies is like really, really lopsided, which is why companies they'll always strive to cut costs rather than make more money, because costs are way more detrimental to them. So like a loss of $1 in terms of cost is the same as losing like $50 in sales for a lot of companies, like as an average. So across industries, so like if you cost the company $300,000, that's the same as like $3 million in sales or something. Like the impact is multiplied hugely. So that's why, union organizing is as effective as it is in the first place, is because costs are so much worse to companies than you're not just cutting sales. Like that's cutting sales is not a big deal. But when you hurt like actual costs, when you damage product or stop product from being made, the impact is like it is more like 10 times, 5 to 10 times more impactful, at least, or 50 times, or whatever.
I can't
whatever
verify.
It
I scrapped a $500 piece of copper because I misread a blueprint 2 weeks ago.
is. Yeah, that hurt. Trust me, that hurt.
Yeah, I've seen that kind of thing happen like all the time. And I imagine also like being shut down for 13 hours, like the raw materials, the inputs are piling up, and they're missing the deliveries of stuff that they have to ship out, like it's there's other people in other facilities that are probably sitting on their hands because they can't, get things moving to this other plant or out of this other plant, so there's ripple effects, like you were
Yeah.
saying.
That's, by the way, just another random tangent. That is way more true today than it has ever been in the past, because in the past they didn't have computer systems that can track everything. So you bought a little bit more, you had greater inventories. Now everything is just in time inventory. So
Right.
Yeah, I was about to say what you're talking about is just in time
Yep.
deliveries.
Yep. So
Yeah.
even more so today, that stuff has greater effect.
Like last year when everyone ran out of toilet
That's why
paper.
shit got so fucked up when COVID
Yeah.
hit.
Everyone ran out of toilet paper,
Yep.
because there wasn't any in the stores sitting around like there would have been 50 years ago.
Exactly.
Well, there wasn't, because there's like a handful of idiots who thought that toilet paper was the real go-to fucking thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's definitely people hoarding toilet paper, but it was also supply lines were way fucked up. So,
I'm going to keep going here.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Towards the end of August, that same summer, there was another wildcat at the Chrysler Forge plant. And this one was a response to, I think in a single week, one worker had his arm ripped off by a piece of machinery, and then another one had his hand
Ugh.
crushed.
Ugh.
And so they let a wildcat strike, for improved safety. And that was led by, I don't have a specific name for the guy, but it was led by a former drum member and somebody who was still in the Communist League. They kept that going for 6 days. I think that they got at least some gains from it. I don't know if they got everything they wanted, but these people were hurting them. Right there, we've got 7.5 days of production lost. Oh yeah, this is great, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier. And you guys were talking about the relationship between the unions and the rums and all.
Mm-hmm.
At that particular wildcat, John Taylor, who was a guy that I discussed a little bit in the first part, who was a Motor City Labor League member, he was there for the wildcat at Chrysler Forge, and I guess he was being very outspoken and there with the Motor City Labor League. And one of the union officials, a dude named Doug Fraser, called out John Taylor specifically, and specifically in respect to what you said, Zach. Doug Fraser told John Taylor to meet him out in the parking lot so that he could whoop his ass. And John Taylor's response was, "Yeah, let's go." And the dude immediately backed down because he thought that he was just going to scare him. And the guy's like, "No, I'm going to fucking go outside and beat your fucking ass." I mean, like, yeah, dude, don't fuck with communists. We're used to losing. The name of the fucking game is getting your shit kicked in and keep going.
Yep.
Yeah, pretty accurate.
So as that strike lasted for 6 days, and then the first day that they went back, there was another wildcat at the Mack stamping plant that was led by other former RUM members. So, not too shabby for a 2-month period, because before Drum, I think it had been something like 10 years since Dodge had any wildcats. I might be misremembering that number, but it was a significant chunk of time. And then the Rums come along and really start stirring shit up. And as I sort of alluded to before, there are some people who speculate that the decline of the Rums was either because of their success, or at the very least, other people were fighting for the same stuff, because people tended to get less fired up because they were actually winning their demands. They were getting more black representatives in management and higher up in the union. They were making moderate gains. There were safety improvements being made. It was going all right for them. So that's sort of the end of these organizations. But there's a couple of other things that I also want to talk about. These people had like electoral success. I didn't touch on it a whole lot, but Ken Cockrell, who again was a founding member of the League, people were encouraging him to run for mayor, and he refused to ever run any sort of symbolic races where he was trying to bring issues to light or anything like that. So at some point in the late 70s, I think maybe 78, he got elected to Detroit City Council.
Okay.
And I think he remained on the Detroit City Council until his death in the 80s.
Wow.
Sheila Murphy, who was the organizer behind Ad Hoc, she was the one whose dad was the anarcho-Catholic. She later became Sheila Cockrell because she actually married Ken Cockrell. She remained on city council from the 80s into the early 2000s.
Huh.
Wow.
And then one of what I can gather is the biggest electoral successes that they had was a Motor City Labor League member named Justin Ravitz. He was elected as a judge in 1973, and he had been known to be a radical Marxist attorney working in Detroit. I cannot remember how directly involved Ken Cockrell was in the James Johnson case, where the guy came in and shot the two supervisors and job setter. Justin Ravitz was one of his defense attorneys. Justin Ravitz also had several lawsuits that he led against Stress, which was the Stop Robberies, Enjoy Safe Streets Detroit program that the police were doing, where they were effectively just setting up people and then fucking killing them and beating them and just being extraordinarily and unnecessarily violent. Ravitz was one of the people who helped get Stress ended. And one of the most discouraging things that I read about his policies were that so many of the things that Justin Ravitz fought for were shit that we're still fighting for. And this is 50 fucking years ago. He was he opposed the cash bond system. I don't even have a list of all the stuff he did, but his goal was interesting. And actually really all of their goals at onset were interesting in that they never viewed electoral success as a win in its own right. By their claims, their only goal in getting into elected positions was to remove hurdles from actual revolutionary movements, which is pretty fucking rad.
Which is what I've always thought should be the goal when it comes to electoral politics, or at least one of the main priorities. Because I'm never comfortable when people are like, oh, we can't do electoralism at all. I'm like, that's where we're at right now. I feel like you can remove some barriers there, that there's good work to be done. So I'm never comfortable with we shouldn't do that. I'm also never sure if we should focus more on that. Sometimes when it's like, well, here, even back in the day, we did have people in all these elected positions fighting for the same shit we're fighting for today. We could argue that, well, there hasn't been so much success on that front, but also maybe because we didn't do enough of it. I don't know. So I'm always torn on that issue, but it's interesting.
I'm not much of an advocate of concerning yourselves over national elections, but on a local level, you can affect genuine material change. There were Justin Ravitz specifically. I read accounts of him opening up court in the middle of the night so that he could prevent somebody from having to, if he felt like charges were not fair or if the person needed process quickly, he would open up court at night just to hear the case and get the person processed.
Huh.
He implemented some sort of policy where it discouraged the police from arresting somebody with the intention of detaining them for 24 to 48 hours. He made it so that if someone was arrested, they had to be charged almost immediately.
Yeah, that's good work.
And he was, to be clear, This guy wasn't like a subtle radical. He was an openly Marxist judge on the bench. He encouraged reactionaries to come like have like dialogue with him because apparently he just had a very personable way about him where people would condemn him for being a radical Marxist and then come talk to him for an hour and walk away like, well, that guy's got a lot of good ideas and he's doing some good work in the community.
That's awesome.
This guy sounds awesome. I mean, I
Yeah,
want more of this.
I couldn't
more
find
judges like this.
ton of information about him, but he seems like the real fucking deal.
What was his name one more time?
And interesting enough, what's
I
that?
just want to know, what was his name one more time?
Justin Ravitz,
Justin?
Ravitz.
Okay. Yeah, he sounds like quite an interesting character. Definitely like worth, maybe looking into more. I mean, I don't know about for this
We
podcast,
actually have
but
a socialist judge in Pittsburgh. He's not full blown Marxist to my knowledge, though I think he has those leanings. He lives up the road from me. I don't know a lot about the successful work that he's done so far. I know that he cut evictions down in his first year on the bench by 60%.
yeah, that's a huge deal. That matters.
Like, you can condemn electoralism all you want to, but hundreds of people have homes now that wouldn't otherwise because of the work that he did. So I'm going to go out of my way to vote anytime that he's on the ballot. We've got a couple of other people like that locally. I'm not the best for being involved in politics locally, but I do try and do some reading and some research. Like, funny enough, the local socialist judge that we had, because he was still working within the system that we exist in, he was able to appoint not deputies, not cops,
Constables. I think.
constable.
Yeah, I think you and I.
He elected a. Oh, did I tell you about this? Yeah, he the local guy. His name is his name's Mick. He brought a buddy of mine on as a fucking constable, and that dude's a fucking hardcore communist. Like,
Nice.
learned German so he could read the original Marx.
I mean,
That's
Yeah.
excessive. That is excessive. Come on.
I mean, the dude's got like 3 master's degrees, so. Well, I mean, he did study in Germany, so it wasn't exactly not beneficial to him in other
Yeah,
ways.
Sure.
But yeah, he read Marx in the original German as somebody who learned German in his like late teens and 20s. Better him than me. Fuck that. So, yeah, that's the whole story. Or in as much as I'm gonna get into it, because I have dedicated like the last 3 or 4 weeks of my life to learning about the nuanced ins and outs of Detroit politics from like 1967 to like 74.
yeah.
But here's something that I wanted to address, and I talked about this earlier. This is not history. This is analysis. I didn't get into this too much, but Ken Cockrell, I think Justin Ravitz was somewhat guilty of this. A lot of people that we have been discussing here for the last few hours, after they got experience organizing, after they got experience in politics, a lot of them never became workers again. They became professional organizers. A lot of them went on, I believe Mike Hamlin, I think it was, became a professor. Ken Cockrell and Sheila Murphy / Sheila Cockrell, lifetime politicians once they got out of this movement. Maybe they did good, but they became very removed from the proletariat. And reading the story, it was concerning because so many of these people who had this passionate and dedication towards these issues walked away from it with basically nothing after the mid to late 70s except like kind of just being fucking libs.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to make a movement that's sustainable. Like I think we talked about this, or maybe I was talking with someone else, but like, there's all these activists that burn out after 2 years, 5 years, whatever. it's hard to keep people engaged with these kind of things, especially if they're losing all the time. And what you end up having instead is if you well sometimes you have a just a rotating door of people coming in, getting energized and doing the work, and then getting burned out and then leaving. And it's difficult to create any organization that has staying power for a long time.
I guess more the point that like I really want to put in here though isn't necessarily like take the case of Ken Cockrell. The dude by every measure did really important work within the League of Revolutionary Black Workers and even beyond that. The work that he did as an attorney was important and it was good. And I haven't read much about what he accomplished, if anything significant, while he was on the city council. But more the point that I want to get to is that these people didn't just remove themselves from the working class. They kind of abandoned it. Like Ken Cockrell's son is an attorney of law at Yale. Like their whole family like became bourgeoisie.
Yeah, I guess I mean that's another thing is if you're using it as a stepping stone to further your own career, that's not what I would call
And
revolutionary.
I would hesitate to say that that was the goal. It just sort of ended up being what happened.
Well, one of the things I think we need to recognize is that we're all human beings, and kind of with the burnout, you know, of activism. I think we also have to recognize that like we are human beings, and it's like you put in that 5, 6, 7 years of radical organizing, and I get if like you're just like, well, I kind of want to focus on my own career and be comfortable. I don't want to be scraping by all the time. I get it. We're all human. We want a comfortable life for ourselves, and that's not even. I'm not trying to condemn that. I'm trying. I don't want to necessarily like. I guess I am defending it, but like I get it. You do the work you can, and then after a while, you're like, I get if you just want to be comfortable for yourself. There's nothing wrong with that per se. However, it's when your ideas kind of become like you start, identifying with the bourgeoisie. That's when it's like a problem. When like there's nothing wrong with making good money. Like if you're like, hey, I can make good money, whatever, and I can do set up for my children to do well, who maybe might be a professor at Yale. But like in that situation, I your kids hopefully are raised with some radical ideas to be, you know what I mean? Like you should still be a radical. There's nothing wrong with like, hey, I've done my bit. Now I do have to focus on myself a little bit. I don't think that's necessarily wrong. We're all human beings just looking for our comfort in the comfort of others. So I don't want to condemn that kind of thing, but like when your ideas soften, that's to me kind of weird. Where it's like, well, yeah, that's where it's like, well, you should still at least be like advocating for communism or anarchism or whatever it is you're advocating. But like I understand that it's like it's not everyone's individual responsibility to be the radical warrior for 50 years of their life. I get that. But yeah, it is kind of weird when their ideas start to when they're still vocal about their ideas and their ideas are pretty like liberal kind of shit, and you're like, that I don't understand fully.
I mean, I'm reluctant to be overly critical because I don't know the work that they were doing on the city council, but Detroit's not notorious for being a sort of radical paradise at this point, so I'm reluctant to think that they did anything too great.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they didn't do really important material, like substantive things for the people of Detroit. They just have not really done anything to further any sort of radical ideas. Oh, and to correct myself real quick, I said that it was Ken Cockrell's son that is a law professor at Yale. It's James Foreman. His son is a law professor now.
Gotcha. So
Yo, that's it. That's the end of like a month of fucking research.
That was good.
yeah, it's good to just like look into these things and see where they went wrong or what was successful, what worked, what didn't work. It's important.
Yeah, definitely.
It's also good to like not have a deadline when you're in a rabbit hole. I'm real good for like going on like 2 or 3 days of tangential research and being like, this has nothing to do with what I was just fucking reading about.
Yeah, I'm a little ADD, so I appreciate the rabbit trails. That's good.
You guys only asked me questions about the rabbit trails I didn't pursue, too, damn it.
What'd you say, Zach?
I was just saying it's just painting more, more colorful picture, more nuanced view of it. That's all it is. Just putting it in context. Yeah. That's my
dude, and I did learn a lot about this. Like, I had no idea about all of the conference. Oh. I think there's like just enough lag that we're really good at talking over each other today.
Yep.
I feel like, you and I, Brandon, keep lagging like really hard between us because I'll start saying something and then it's just like right in the middle.
Yeah, my bad.
It's just technology sucks.
Yeah. All right, we're just rambling right now. We wanna call it a night.
Yeah, I'll kill the recording at least, unless you got something else to say.
I got nothing. I got brain melt right now.
We don't think fight fire with fire, bitch. We think you fight fire with water, bitch. We gonna fight racism, not with racism, but we gonna fight with solidarity. We said we're not gonna fight capitalism with black capitalism, but we going to fight with socialism.
Amazingly, or not so amazingly, Cuba's crime rate is one of the lowest in the entire hemispheres. Oddly enough, it seems that when people have their basic human needs met, they're less likely to commit crimes.
My calculations are correct. When this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're gonna see some serious shit.
The free market mythology, it argues that the most ruthless, selfish, opportunistic, greedy, calculating plunderers, applying the most heartless measures in cold-blooded pursuit of corporate interest and wealth accumulation, will produce the best results for all of us. Through something called the invisible hand.
What are you smiling about?
Dude, I almost had you.